the Age of Uncertainty podcast by Nigel Baker. Scaling Agile Principles.
Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Age of Uncertainty podcast. This one is all about scaling agile principles with Colin Bird. Or is that Agile Scaling Principles with Colin Bird? Or Scaling Principles with Agile Colin? Colin, Agile, Principle Scaling Bird? Anyway, as you can see, it's a really interesting conversation and a really long one. So get yourself a mug of tea, maybe a mug of coffee, or maybe even an espresso martini, and join us for a deep dive into the world of Agile Scaling Principles, Scaling Agile Principles with Colin Bird. Hi Colin, how are you doing?
Hi Nigel, I'm doing good. You?
I'm doing wonderful as always. Thoroughly enjoying my video podcast series that we're working on. And the reason I invited you here today was, hopefully the audience know this, but I've known you, Colin, for, gosh, a long time. I think it's now approaching 16 or so years. Don't like to count after the first few, do you? It's like marriage.
Yeah.
You do the first few anniversaries.
There are times when I feel like I'm married to you, Nigel.
That's great. Old married couple. But what was really interesting was the last time we met up was at one of the Scrum gatherings in Lisbon, and you and a few other Scrum trainers started running through some really interesting ideas you were having in the world of scaling, like scaling principles, etc. And I thought it sounded really interesting, and I thought it'd be really interesting to have a chat about, a bit of an interview on that topic of like scaling principles within Agile. And so where do you start with such a topic? You could go anywhere, couldn't you? So what I thought I would do is just say, like, who were the team with you coming up with these ideas, and why were you coming up with these new ideas on scaling Agile principles?
It all started pretty much in lockdown. There was a virtual guides retreat, and I think somebody called Nigel Baker posted a topic on the open space, said what the Scrum Alliance should do next and why it should be scaling. And so a big group of people got together, and what we could agree about wasn't a lot, but we could agree that there's definitely a challenge out there. So many organizations are trying to adopt, whether it's the Spotify model, SAFe, or whatever, and not seeing the value they'd like to see from it, or just failing miserably. I mean, however you want to describe it. So challenging to bring Agile to larger programs, work, larger products, and organizational wide. And so, what do we need to do about it? The answer was not another scaling framework. There's plenty of them out there. We were trying to look for what's needed, what will actually help people. Anyway, this large group of people, very passionate about it. We had a few more meetings. It kind of dwindled down to about 16. And then finally, we had a kind of core of 5 of us. So we've got Simon Roberts. I'll start with the names I can pronounce easily. Matt Roadnight, Jan Olsen, Pierluigi, and how do we say his surname? Pugliese. I'm sorry, Pierluigi, but I'm going with that. So that's the group. Hopefully I haven't missed anybody out. There's 5 of us. Kind of like a good Scrum team, I guess. We all got different perspectives, experiences. We argue lots. We've got lots of differences of opinion. And for the last 2 years, pretty much Monday nights, we've been getting together kind of after school hours. We've really got into this. We feel that we've got an alternative framework-free, or at least framework-agnostic approach. And we've started building out effectively a principle-led approach to understanding your scale challenges, understanding how your organization is currently structured, and giving you kind of lenses, if you will, to inspect and then adapt and try new patterns without being prescriptive about the specific patterns you should choose in any particular context. So that's what the group's been working on. We've got very passionate into it. Over Christmas particularly, we spent quite a few days solidly working on it, dividing up, covering different areas, coming back together, sharing our perspectives and so on, reworking the thoughts. So it's been bringing together lots of different experiences, lots of different ways of thinking, and trying to boil out good ways of articulating, expressing quite complicated ideas, including looking at some of the language, the terminology and so on that we will use to describe things. So, things like a product. In Scrum, we're very focused on a product owner and the idea of a product, and we want to be product, not project driven and so on. But one of the things we found is that you go and talk to an organization, you go and talk to the finance department, they go, well, we're finance, what's our product? And so the idea of product, we tripped over when we're going a little bit wider inside an organization. And so really focusing more in the value stream modeling and really looking at value streams and digging into it, seeing that actually the truth is even more complex than that in many cases. And you have what we termed composite value streams. So just understanding that you've got in a value stream, you may have auxiliary bits of the organization like HR, finance, etc., that don't work to a product as we would see it in a Scrum way, but they're still very much part of that value stream. So those are the sorts of things we've been doing, and that's the kind of the group that's been doing it. And we're carrying on working on it literally yesterday, and we've got a meeting this evening on it as well. So it's still a work in progress. And I think, to be honest, like any of these things, it's huge. We've got a lot of content together, but there's so much more to add into it.
Yeah, because I was really interested about you said who's involved in this, because I remember first meeting you all those years back, and you were talking about scaling right back then. I seem to remember.
Yeah, I think the 2007 London gathering.
I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and myself and Rachel did a chat on scaling.
And so that obviously, and Matt as well, ex-colleague of yours, friend, collaborator of yours.
I know, but he's been around Matt for a very long time.
Yeah, very long time. He's been
around my life, I think.
That really is a marriage. But he's been on the scene a long time. I've known Simon a long time. We worked at BT together for a while. And so there's these big sort of scaling, big project, big enterprise influences. But were there other influences in there, like coming from other spaces, perhaps into that world? I remember, I think it was like reinventing organizations and things like this. Was any of that coming to mind?
I think when we all get talking, it's not long before this book or this idea or this, so nothing's been off, off-piste or we can bring any thinking in here. So anything from things like psychological safety and the team dynamics, the more human side, organizational structures, things like budgeting, beyond budgeting. So there's lots and lots of thinking from people like Steve Denning, Dave Snowden around complexity. So we're bringing a lot of different ideas in there. So, if we're honest about it, how much of what we've done is original? I'd say that, it's taking lots of great thinking. We stand on the shoulders of giants, but I think what we are bringing together is pulling the stuff together and putting it into a form that travels well. So if you think about patterns and practices, they're context specific. And the larger and more complex a pattern gets, the less and less applicable it gets. So something like SAFE, which is effectively a meta pattern, isn't it? So it's a pattern of patterns. They absorb lots of good stuff like, design thinking, continuous delivery, lean stuff, and they sort of squish it together. I would argue that we lose a lot in the squishing together bit, but it's such an enormous pattern. For it to actually apply to any given context, it's like winning the lottery. Whereas you then go down to the other end of the spectrum and look at Scrum, it's so small, described in 13 pages. And the point is it's very, very small pattern, so it has high applicability. Is it completely applicable in every context? No. And then, of course, built into it is the ability to inspect and adapt it. So it kind of acknowledges that it's going to have to vary by context. So if you don't scale it up to something like SAFE, it's just too big. And, it's like an oil tanker. And bringing an oil tanker to the picture when you're trying to get agile, it's just not going to work that well. And what we're seeing out there, not only we got these influences of thinkers, etc., but we're seeing a lot of occasions where we're brought in to fix a situation. And when you go and look at it, it's a failed implementation of either the Spotify model. We've got squads, etc., but we're just not getting what we need out of it. We know it's not working. We've got SAFE, we're doing these PIs still, etc., but it wasn't working. So can you come in and help? And all of us are seeing lots of different instances of that. And so there's the experiences and what we're finding from lots and lots of different types of organizations and so on, no particular verticals. And so this thing that we keep seeing, this is where our experiences are coming. And a lot of, I guess if you go back to the Agile Manifesto, what they were doing there was taking all their different experiences, their different approaches, and then trying to tease out distill out the fundamentals underneath. And that's what we've been trying to do. Take our experiences and all good thinking and squeeze out the kind of that really pervasive, good set of principles that travel well and can be applied very, very broadly.
Yeah, because there's like three really interesting things in there that I want to bring out. First one is the last one you touched upon, which is genuine pragmatism, isn't it? Pragmatism is what works and deriving a theory from it. And a lot of things we see in our space in Agile in 2022 are great theory, shame about the reality. And also, so that's already something very interesting for me, the idea that principles can be massively pragmatic. You know, it doesn't mean they're bendable and weak. Like, oh, you don't like my principles? Don't worry, I've got others. But they're actually guiding lights that are driven from real experience and not driven from hope. So that's one interesting thing for me there to really bring out, because I think that's important. The other one is about the Scaled Agile Framework, which is the big animal in the industry, both physically and...
we can call it the elephant in the room.
Elephant in the room. But the trouble with SAFe is it's actually a methodology, isn't it? In reality. It's some people don't like the M word, but it is. It's a list of a range of good practice recipes that you're all supposed to apply. Just the other day, I got a bit of trouble on social media. Not me.
No.
Not me. But I made a comment about, because I was reading some of the SAFe material, and they were talking about how PI planning, like big run planning, is the heart of SAFe. It's like the fundamental piece of SAFe is big run planning, right? And release trains off the back of that. And we all know that actually, big run planning is a contextual practice, good for some people, not good for others. Release trains especially sometimes have great applicability or terrible applicability, depending on the context. But pretending those good practices are fundamental, best core practices driving a method already reveals something's rotten in the kingdom of Denmark, to quote Hamlet. Something's rotten at the heart of the experience. And so I think it's really interesting to talk about driving it from principles, but isn't there a risk with that? So that's the third thing. Like, if you think about I remember my parents had a Betamax video recorder back in the early 80s, and it was so
about principles, not pragmatism.
Well, I'll tell you what, it was the advertising was this: it's so simple to use, even a 5-year-old can use it. Okay, and so they had to get me down to use it because I was the only person who knew how to set the time recorder.
Only a
5-year-old could use it. And so is there a risk with being principle driven that it's actually creating a large set of cookery knives, and you could be giving them to naive, when something like a methodology, it's a recipe, even an idiot can follow it?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about our history in the scaling space, Craig Larman, Bas Voda wrote 2 excellent books very early, 2005, 2007, somewhere around there. And effectively, the 2 books are Scaling Principles and Patterns. And I loved those books, still do. Lots of great stuff in there. And if you look at the way they've written them, going, right, if you've got this problem, you could try this, or this, or this. And so it was tied back into principles. These are good things to do. So something like feature teams versus component teams. Yeah, feature teams are a better idea because, and they're drilled through the principles. But then, of course, if we kind of wind forward into the pragmatism a bit, where you've got a very, very complex value stream, the one that Pierluigi likes to use, if you've got a car manufacturer, say BMW, you've got somebody who makes the engines. And then, of course, the car itself is being assembled. So what's the value? Well, obviously, a car that I can drive away. Does the engine have value then, or no value? Well, I could sell it as a spare, so on. So it's got value in itself. All right, the skills required to build the engine versus fitting a seat into the car. Okay, very, very different sets of skills and so on. And so you can start to see that you've got specializations, etc. Are you going to have feature teams who, build cars, engines, everything? Well, it just doesn't work in that particular context. So you're going to have people who build engines. And of course, you've got the multi-use idea then as well. We can build this 2-litre petrol engine, and it can go into a 1 series, a 2 series, a 3 series, a States, a normal saloon. Yeah, and so they're a ubiquitous bit of value, which is a component which is put into something else. So you can start to see that the principle itself, underneath, we're trying to make sure that we've got as close to the end-to-end value from a team as possible. we're trying to make sure that we've got the fewer dependencies that the Agile team can actually contain and boundary those, so we can have as high autonomy a team as possible. So there's a set of principles you're trying to drive. And then in any particular situation, you're going to have to flexibly map the practices. That sounds really difficult, and it is. Yeah, and scaling, I mean, doing Agile with a single team, as we all know, is way harder than it should be. You know, my children have always asked me as they were growing up, what do you do for a living? And I said, applied common sense. My daughter's gone, you get paid for that? And I said, well, yes, luckily I do. It's not as common as it should be. And the trick is almost never applied. So if Agile as a single team is complicated and hard to do, when we scale up, it's massively hard to do. And so when we kind of embarked on this journey of coming up with the principles, one of my key worries, you know, and I kept saying to the team, they're going, this is all lovely stuff, the principles are absolutely buy into them and so on. How are people going to use and consume them? Yeah, and I was, you know, it was a big question going, yes, it's all good, but, you know, we can put it out there, be interesting read and so on. People go, yeah, very nice. And maybe we'll get a little bit of value from it. It was Jan and Matt put together a conference talk last year. And I think it was XP 2022. And they came up with, effectively, they took just a couple of their real examples and they kind of worked them through with the principles, and they came up with this graphical, visual way of workshopping and building the model for both of their different examples, just using a subset of our principles around product and teams, just to kind of view what the organization had, look through these principles and see where the principles were under pressure. Going, yeah, okay, yeah, we've got, you know, very componentized teams here, lots of handoffs, you know, very long integration and lead time cycles, etc. So we're kind of, you know, impinging on these principles. And so visually doing this, and then visually going, right, well, we could start improving here. And so the idea being that the principles are lenses through which, with a kind of tool, if you will, in terms of the visual workshop approach, how you actually then apply it. So what we've kind of resolved down into is a set of concepts. So, you know, more wordy reading about things like the value stream and the complex of the composite value streams I was talking about. So people go, oh, okay, right, got that. Can see the kind of the model and how that works, the language and so on. The principles themselves, which we kind of grouped by things like product or product, how you structure a product ownership, teams, leadership, etc. And then a set of tools. And we can bring any tools to bear. We don't have to invent all the tools ourselves. Matt and Ian just came up with this very nice approach. Don't know what to call it, but it's kind of visual mapping technique, not value stream mapping, but not too far away from it. You could apply things like value stream mapping and so on. So we're going to have a set of tools. We've got, you know, some of our own already that you can then apply, and a practical workshop technique. So take the principles, apply them like this. It's not giving you answers, but it's giving you a way to get some at least good questions. And then the next step, and we haven't articulated a single pattern yet because there's so many out there anyway. It will be how you then choose those patterns. So I guess what we're trying to do is take some of the heavy lifting out of the process, but not try and articulate in detail all the tiny detailed patterns that you're going to apply as in safe in any instance. Yeah, big room planning might be good. But what comes out of big room planning? Yeah, a lot of the things I've had to go in and look at have been, you know, we've got 6 2-week sprints in our PI, and we want to understand and plan out all of the work for all of the sprints up front, understand all our dependencies between these 8 different teams, and have it all the plan out there. And then we're going to measure the team on how close to the plan they were. That's waterfall. Okay. Yeah. But getting everyone together, doing a really big picture, going, right, what are our overall goals for the next 12 weeks? Okay, let's get our ducks in a row. Who's going to need to talk to it? Who's going to need to work together on this? How can we minimize that dependency? Okay, let's plan our first sprint, go for it. All right, come back. All right, where's our plan? Yeah, it's not there, adapt it. So again, it's a question of how you use these practices. And I would do different things in different instances. Do I actually need all 8 teams to get together in big room planning? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe there's 3 of them really need to talk to each other because they're kind of all working together. And there's the other bunch who are actually autonomous. Well, I wouldn't do a single big room planning. I'd adapt it. And I think this is one of the problems with the bigger the framework, the less people think. Yeah, all the answers are there. And so they just take out their brain and go, as you call it, recipe. I'm just going to follow the recipe. I don't know how to cook. Yeah. But hopefully, if I follow this recipe, the same thing will happen every time.
Yeah, I don't have margarine, but I've got polyfiller. I'm sure that will do. I haven't got an oven, but I've got the sun. Oh, that's near enough. I'm sure I'll follow. And so there's so many interesting things I want to pull out of there. So I think one interesting thing for me was about, I don't know what you called it, but it sounded to me like a principle matrix, like some way of mapping principles against practices. I think that's really powerful as an idea, because all these methods, and this is the big thing I've been pushing for years, all these methods that get pushed are two-dimensional methods. They're snapshots of methods. They're not explaining the third or fourth dimension of growth and time. How do you evolve towards it? It's all just a picture. And so methods to actually changing, because one part of scaling is changing, and that part, changing, methods to help change from the status quo to the new world, I think is equally as important as possible good practices to change into. And so having methods to help do that, to reflect and analyze that changing, to adapting as you go through with the ideas, I think is incredibly critical.
You hit the nail on the head there. So another problem with a big picture, and sales marketing is great. So they come up with this big picture. This is what you need to do to successfully scale. Right. Where's our organization at the moment? Right.
Yeah.
There's the 2B design. Let's redo everybody's roles. Just call them different things. We're going to release train engineer. Off you go. Right. And then we'll basically do one transaction. We're here at the minute, and then tomorrow when you come in on Monday, we're going to be over here. And so it's about understanding that change has to be done from wherever we are now. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things we need to do is really understand where we are. And so the tools are talking about, really the first thing to do is to take a lens into what is in our organization at the moment. Mm-hmm. How's it structured? How are things working, not working, etc. Let's really understand it and then figure out where the next step is. So Dave Snowden says a lot of this in complexity. Really try and understand, not what's written on paper, what the informal networks, how do things actually get done at the moment? All right, it's a complex system, involves lots of different processes, human beings, etc., unpredictable things, partners, external circumstances, COVID, not COVID, who knows? It's complex. All right, so understand where we are and then figure out what the next good thing looks like. Try it as an experiment. And this is all about lean and agile change. So it's not just about working out where you want to get to in a scaling model. It's working out how we're going to bring people with us, the stakeholders, etc., and the people who are being changed need to be part of that change. So there's a lean and agile change process that has to take part of this. And again, this is where the psychological safety has to come in. We have to be prepared to fail. We have to be able to try experiments and have them not work so well, and focus on maximizing learning as opposed to, we saw the velocity figures on these teams go up. It has to be about learning and then understanding that once we've done that, we'll then inspect and move on to the next step, and And it's a continuous process. It's not a transactional system at all.
Yeah, back into Snowden's Cynefin, it's the two major things there. For me, one is the sort of the multiple parallel safe-to-fail experiments. So you're right, a lot of organizational...
You just need to make sure that they're independently, you can experiment independently, and they're not, you could try two different things and actually end up net neutral because they
crash into each other. But I was just more thinking about a lot of experiments. And I spoke about this in one of the last workshops I did for the video collaboration tools. A lot of experiments aren't experiments, they're like harpoons. Easy to fire in, but hard to get out. Like the example I used in that video was Jira, and it's not Jira's fault, but Jira's easy to buy the licenses. You configure your process in it, and it's a bear to change that process in it. And so all of a sudden, you've locked down process too early when it needs to be iterating and learning and changing. And so that aspect of the sort of bringing that Cynefin infusion into something like this, I think is a really powerful thing. And I think it's missing from the current offerings. Like SAFe, I don't think even believes in that. That's not its mental model. The mental model's Leffing-Wells, rational unified process, large scale method. I've some of the conversations I've had, I'm not going to put on video, but
I think they're appealing to the audience. I think what they've done really, really well is worked out who's going to buy this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So people who want surety, I want to pay. We're going to invest in being an agile. We're a BP, but we want to be an agile organization, right? How do I buy agile in? And it's that kind of mentality that I think they absolutely tap into. But we're seeing more and more and more noise, I guess, around the fact that it might be called safe, but it's anything but.
Well,
you know?
yeah.
And it's definitely, if you pay out the money and train a lot of people,
Yeah.
magic doesn't necessarily happen.
Yeah, I don't want to get into like specifically any particular method bashing here.
You can take the profile model, which is of course not a model.
Thing. Yeah,
and people just blindly put that in, and we call them all squads. We agile now.
It's the mentality behind it, isn't it? The introduction of it. But the reason I mentioned Cynefin is even stuff like the large-scale Scrum, like Baz and Craig's work, lacks a lot of that Cynefin thinking because Cynefin's come along since they first developed it. And so I think
they might argue differently, actually.
In what way? They do have rules and experiments, but I mean, like...
Well, I'll obviously let Craig and Bas do their own argument, but based on conversations certainly with Bas that I've had, I think I'd like if I had to pick any framework, it would probably be less. There's a lot to like about that, particularly around the principles. And the principles, of course, are very much based on lean and understanding that the systems are complex, etc., and it's highly adaptive. So I think even if they didn't express it in Cynefin type terms, they've assumed that we're working in a highly complex and adaptable space. And so there's a lot of good stuff in less.
Because there is, so I really like less as well. The reason I brought it up was because there's been this, in the sort of the Snowden world, there's this sort of anthropology aspect to it, and anthropology has been something I've been really interested in the last couple of years. The idea of, you say, going and being there. Don't comment before you know, and don't know until you've really lived the experience, understanding the actual culture, being part of the system before you start critiquing the system, right? And that sort of anthropology aspect, the secrets, what's not written down. And I know Les has got a huge focus on sort of systems thinking, which again, I actually quite like systems thinking, but I know some people in the Cynefin space are more, I'm not going to say antagonistic, that's too strong, but more critical of system thinking. And so something for me coming from that sort of, I'm not sure the quite terms Snowden uses for it.
There's a kind of human element.
Human anthropology.
The fluffy side of humans. Just because I've got something that on paper as a system argument looks really convincing, logical, etc. I pick up this logical pattern and go, right, organization, you're going to use it. I'm going to have people go, no, I'm not doing that. Where's my job going? And then you've got a leader who thinks they're all, open-minded and so on, but you listen to their language and go, okay, you're telling everybody what to do. You're not asking them questions and so on. So the style of leadership, the culture and so on. So there's a complexity in the human side of it, I think, which we probably as an industry or as a professional bunch have got much better understanding, articulation, and I think, yes, the anthropology side of it is starting to come through. Psychological safety and so on. It wasn't even a term when Bas and Craig were putting together less in the early days.
And so what's interesting for me as well, but right from the start of this conversation, was when we talked about scaling, terms came up like HR, finance. And this, of course, is taking scaling, budgeting. This is taking the ing outside of product development. So you see these agile principles being more like enterprise agile principles than particularly sort of product development, big product development agile principles. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think, and so, part of our conversation, we're starting with going, well, what is scale anyway? I've got 2 teams. Does that scale? And so, of course, there's actually a spectrum of it. Am I just within an organization, just doing a product that's got lots of moving parts, time to market of months, not years? So I'm going to have to put 10 teams on it. You can go away and argue about that one as well. But that in itself is kind of still boxed. Can we isolate out its rules, its governance, etc., away from the rest of the organization? Well, okay, when it's spending a certain amount of money, no, we need to look at finance and governance, etc. So other things will start to come in. So it's a bit of a sort of broader string, really. How, what is scaling? Where does it start and stop? And so I don't think there's a clean boundary on it. And we can't just say, in our definition of scaling, it's just, more than X teams. And I think in most, if you look at the job of a ScrumMaster, and you'll see this as well. We train and work with lots of ScrumMasters, and a lot of them are what I would call team-focused ScrumMasters. They look after the team, facilitate the team, try and make the team better and so on, but they don't kind of look up into the organization. Okay, the change agent aspect of the Scrum Master is very much undersold or underappreciated, certainly underdone as far as Scrum Masters are out there. Well, straight away, that's kind of bumping into scaling, isn't it? So I think when we've been writing these principles, a lot of the principles, when we wrote them, we went, yeah, well, that's just a good thing to do anyway. Why is it a scaling principle? Why is it even more important to scale? And then some of the principles we kind of threw away and went, you know what? Yeah, they're just good principles and unaffected by scale. You should be doing that stuff anyway. Some, or a lot, we've gone, but at scale, these extra factors, you kind of turn up the volume to 11. And so if you don't do it, the wheels are really going to fall off. And so I'm basically not really answering your question. I'm saying, yeah, it's a bit fluffy, isn't it? Yeah. Even at a single team, you're going to bump into aspects and challenges from scale, trying to work inside an organization, bumping into budgeting. I mean, you probably see this as well. So much dysfunction in organizations comes out from the way they try and plan their budgets, lock them down, allocate them to specific parts. That's inherently in Agile. Something happens, well, our money's all locked away in little boxes over here. It's not Agile. And so, yeah, I don't know where scaling starts and stops, to be honest.
Because it's interesting, isn't it? Because the title of this video is, I've done in big letters, Scaling Agile Principles. Yeah. And the Agile's like a slightly smaller word, because it could be scaling principles, the principles of how to make your things bigger. Or it could be scaling Agile, the principles of scaling Agile. Or it could be scaling Agile Principles. How do you take those things?
Or it could be applying Agile thinking at scale.
So for me, it's like growing. Some scaling could be like growing or evolving, which I think a lot of people don't mention.
And even there, you see the growing word. So one of the things, of course, was we have these concepts of descaling.
Oh, yeah.
You know? So, and part of and you're asking about kind of external references and so on. So complexity and understanding an organization has what we call essential complexity, just because there's lots of moving parts and so on. The stuff we can't boil down, distill any further, can't simplify any further, versus the accidental complexity, the idiocy that comes along with doing mad things with budgeting, the silos of departments and so on. Operations are over there. Yes, we never talk to them. In marketing, yeah, they're all a bit hippie. We don't talk to them either. So that's all the accidental stuff that we can work on. So one of the things, of course, we're going to want to try and do is reduce the size of our problem. If we're not talking scale, you know, we've got a problem this big. Okay, but are there different decisions and the way we structure things, the way we set policies, etc.? Yeah, can we actually reduce the problem so we don't have such a scale problem? I mean, I've over the years, I remember doing Tesco.com, and we're doing the international program. Some brilliant engineers over in India. We're just chatting, and the program's scaling up and scaling up. And straight away they're going, you know what? Last program project I did had 5 of us. You know, and in 3 months we got so much further than we have now with like 10 teams. And so it's very often a small focused group can actually do massively great things. So before you go, yeah, we have to scale it and I have to have 10 teams. Well, let's just figure out actually what is stopping a group of 5 or 7 doing the good stuff. Okay, it isn't enough. Now what's the next step? And it's a much more smooth evolution rather than just throwing 10 teams at it. I remember a conversation, the same example, with the program manager. Before we actually had a proper backlog and knew what we're doing, we had 3 teams already spun up and working. And I said, well, what are they working on? The core stuff, the stuff we know we'll need. And there were months before we actually got to the point of going, right, here's our vision. This is what we're going to do. This is going to be the first country we're going to roll out to. Right, what those guys been doing? Yeah, we're going to have to unroll and unpack that. Oh, we can't throw it away. And it took us more work to work with and around the stuff they already had because they'd scaled and assumed too much too early.
And this is where, again, I think in this space, we're going to have to draw on so many other factors. Because like I had the same experience as you. We had a massive big product, one of the first big product developments ever with Agile. And the people were saying to us, well, when we were 6, we were quicker before we brought on 6 teams all around the country. So it's like, oh God. But so those experiences need to come out. But 2 interesting things you brought up, like accidental complexity. I think Deming had like 7 errors made by managers, like 7 classic management errors. So these things have sat in companies a long time. It's bringing that back to the surface. You said about ScrumMasters being change agents, which is my big pushing point. I make a huge fuss over it, yet no one does it. They deliberately, I think often organizations make ScrumMasters part-time deliberately to cut their legs off. To say, okay, you can't.
You're just administrating. How long does it take to update Jira?
Yeah, they don't want to give you the time to think wider. But Cotter, in some of his latest work, has talked about volunteer change armies. So if you're actually going to change an organization, you need to have an actual real workforce of volunteers and people who are actively improving the business. That is ScrumMaster institutionalized. So it's like a fundamental change error made. So perhaps we need to get away from the scaling word altogether. Perhaps it isn't about saying big, it's about, say, evolving. How do I evolve an agile organization? Because, of course, for the other stuff with your principle driving, and I'm well aware the clock's ticking on us, we're scaling this to a big area. But talking about the scaling back to like that, starting small is obviously the best. You know, evolve it to the right level. You find you won't need 1 million people if you start small. But the trouble is that's a context that is much narrower than the context that is commonplace, which is we are already big.
Yeah,
you know,
and it's just the throw money at it.
Yeah,
if I just throw people and money at it, then and the sooner we start, the sooner we finish. There's a whole bunch of counterintuitive assumptions that organizations and people make, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem to matter how many times we try it and it doesn't work. We still hold on to those beliefs that if we do that, it'll be a good thing. Yeah, sometimes we need just a little bit more patience. Start it small. And this is where you need to be pragmatic around some of our principles. So we have team guideline sizes of 10 or less. Sometimes we might expressly have a team of 20. Inefficient, yeah, absolutely massively inefficient. Meetings are a bit longer than we need to be. But you know what? We're optimizing, maximizing learning, and having a single team to build out the executable architecture and figure out all the key non-reversible decisions out early as a single team. Understand why we made certain architectural design decisions and business decisions and business modeling and so on. And then we can divide up and add more people, and we can take that knowledge and understanding with us, but starting with a maximizing knowledge, paying down on risk, mitigating, proving out assumptions early, and then growing success. And so it is going to be faster. It just feels that if I throw 10 teams at it, surely they'll make more space. No, they'll just create more noise and a mess that you need to clean up afterwards.
And also, there's going to have to be some guide rails on this. Because, we say descaling. Okay, we're too big. Well, the trouble is, what does descaling actually look like? Because a lot of organizations today are descaling. I'm not going to name them, but I saw a very famous American firm where we've all known many famous agile people have come out of. I think it was yesterday or the day before, fired every single agile person in their organization. Every single agile delivery lead, or whatever they call them in their place. 1,000 people gone, right? And so my worry is, we talk about descaling. What we're talking about is making, being more efficient with our stuff, not necessarily another tool to get more for less. Hey, I don't need those 300.
Completely agree. I don't think we've used the words descaling in any of our stuff either. And I should probably deserve a slap for even mentioning the phrase. And I think you're completely right. So if you look at what they did with lean, lean means, less, take out all the fat, fire everybody. And that is not what Toyota, meant by lean. Not that they even called it lean. And so taking stuff out and using that as a smokescreen to downsize and get rid of people and save money. And so this comes back to I'm saving money rather than increasing the value. There's people just look at the cost side. They don't look at the value creation a part of it. And again, coming back to ScrumMaster, not perhaps doing their full remit of their job. Their job is to maximize the value of a team. If we're in knowledge work, which is most of us on the planet are now, the more my team know, the more capability they have, the higher function, the higher potential my team. And as a Scrum Master, I need to be making sure they're learning as much as they are building stuff. And so as an organization, we need to be making sure that we're not just cutting stuff out. So removing the Scrum Masters, calling them Agile Delivery Leads, removing the coaches, etc., etc. I'm leaning out. That's a very short-termist, and this is where Steve Denning will really have a go at them absolutely rightly, for really just missing the point and doing short-term shareholder value, and then they retire and move off with the millions, and then the organization itself is hollowed out, doesn't have the value potential, and it's going to be dinosaured, and some other startup will eat its lunch.
Well, it's like I say, I've got a bit heavy in my middle age, And so I need to lose some weight. I need to become
think you're
more
just as svelte as when I first met you, Nigel.
cuddly teddy bear. But I've got an excellent new way to lose weight in seconds, right? I could literally take 30% of my body weight off in seconds.
With
It's
a sharp enough implement.
yeah, amputation. There we go. Amputation. Yeah, it makes you lighter, but it massively limits your ability to move forward. Literally in this example, metaphorically in the business. So I am aware we haven't deep dived these principles and the video's got long, but I'm also aware that this is still under development. It's still not fully published out in the open yet. It's still sort of being worked out a little bit, you know, a little bit stealth at the moment.
Yeah, it's absolutely going to be in the public domain this year. And probably earlier rather than later. So we've got some conference things that we're doing and what we want to be doing. We're running OOP, we're doing a full day workshop if anyone's coming to it. It's Munich, but it's all online. So we're doing a whole day workshop, and what we'll be doing is taking a subset of principles, working through it. But what we'd like to do after that is actually have the first version of our wiki available for people to access at that point. So that's our kind of rough aim. Whether we make it or not, what we're trying to do at the moment, we've got a lot of knowledge put together. You know, it's basically a large book of knowledge in a wiki, all nice instructions on, but not 100% consistent. We've changed our style, and as we've evolved, so we need to go through, fill in a few of the gaps. This is what we're doing this Christmas. There's so much that's already useful in there. So what will happen is we will be pragmatic. And make sure that we've also discovered actually in working through it, some of the principles are more fundamental than some others. Some of them are nice, yeah, and they make sense and so on, but some of them are absolutely core. And we're trying to understand what the difference between, yeah, nice, makes sense, versus, yeah, you've got to have this. So we haven't come up with a sort of, you know, clean definition of it, but we will be looking to make at least our MVP of that available as early as possible this year, and then evolve it from there.
What you need is the Nigel scale, the world famous Nigel scale, where I break down into fundamental best practice, good practice, and bad practice, or something like that. So I think it'll be interesting though. What I would like to see, just from hearing this conversation, I would love to see some sort of meta principles about how you apply the principles. You know, i.e. apply these with the right spirit and intent. These are very sharp knives. And that's what I would like is a customer health warning. I think it's quite important because these are very sharp implements. You could do great benefit. Yeah, you could do great benefit to your organization with this. But if you don't think it through, and if you don't truly get the right experiences with them, like those sharp cooking knives, you can end up chopping up your carrots and your fingers.
Yeah, so hence the you know, the idea of a playbook. We know, I think particularly in the American audience, I think uses that kind of phrase. And so rather than prescribing what the end result should be, giving a good playbook and a way through this. And actually coming back to the principles, one of the things the principles are structured in terms of not just categorized, but one of the top level categories are the kind of, you said meta principles. Yeah. As we when we were first going through this, we did figure that some were just generally applicable principles. So we've got about 8 generally applicable principles. Yeah, I think we probably just need to warm up the articulation and the guidance to avoid people shooting themselves in the foot or chopping their limbs off.
Yeah. Or if they do, because this is the thing, I could easily imagine, you get too sucked into writing a playbook, and before you realise it, it's a thick, chunky specification, definition, and you've reinvented something. Like you've reinvented RUP again, or ITIL even, and you're like, whoops. But yeah, I think something I would be fine with having customer warnings on it, because these are, keep coming back to it, but to me, these are those beautiful, I'm going to put a picture up now on the screen, those beautiful, well-engineered Japanese carving knives. You see them advertised on TV, they can chop anything, you do your lovely cooking with them, beautiful, elegant, powerful.
But you could end up with fingers in your dinner.
Dangerous in the wrong hands. And I think that's the space for this. Because I think large enterprises, they're big, difficult, complex areas, and they need to do this. You know, you can't simplify surgery down for dum-dums. You know, so this is that type of space.
Even with all of that, I get the kind of health warnings and all the rest of it, putting in guardrails, playbooks, etc. In the end, these problems are going to be very, very difficult problems to solve. Yeah. We can't take out the requirement for brain power. Yeah. You're going to have to think for yourselves We can help give you the framework to help you think about it. But in the end, you're going to have to do hard work, make smart-ish decisions. Some of them will turn out not to be smart. You'll learn, feedback in. And so there's the reality in there. No matter how well we do this, the complex problem isn't going to have a simple answer. Yeah. It's going to have a complex answer that you'll need to evolve to and then keep evolving. And it will require brain power. It will require, buy-in and so on. You'll not get it from everybody. There are going to be stops and starts, some bits that work, some bits that don't. So the reality is going to be messy and dirty. There's no promise on here that, hey, just add this to this and all your problems will go away, sadly.
Yeah. Unfortunately, snake oil doesn't work on snakes, and it's not even oil. Okay, so to wrap this up now then. So this is not published yet, but where can they find out more about it? So you said about in Munich. What was happening in Munich again?
The OOP conference. We are doing a whole day, and the thing is called Scale Agility. We had to have a name, so that's what it is. And it's a media wiki setup, and that will be published. Just follow our blogs and Twitter handle. You can get me a Colin Bird tweets very, very occasionally on Twitter, or on Mastodon. I'm Agile Bird on Mastodon, which of course we much prefer to Twitter nowadays, everybody.
Yeah.
All the lovely people are over in Mastodon, just in case nobody's worked one out yet. And then, yes, and if you want to look me up, particularly at Ripple Rock, so colin.bird at ripple-rock.com, and we'll let you know when it's all out and about, but it will be very soon. I think I said that about 8 months ago.
Well, in terms of geological time, it's just a second.
It's just a blink of an eye.
Blink of an eye. Thank you so much, Colin. I've really enjoyed this. I've got great fun out of this. I thought it was really enlightening. I hope the rest of the audience have done so as well. And I hope to see you soon,
we'd love
mate.
to have feedback, actually, as always. Yeah. And if there's anything we can do to help, then let us know.
Cheers, Colin. Thank you very much. Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers, Nigel. You take care.
Whew, now that was a long one. You knew these marathon podcasts were coming back, and Colin loves a chat. I love a chat. This could have gone on for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. We barely scraped the surface. Stuff about principles in tension, we never even got to it in this conversation. And hopefully, when this work is officially published, you can all start deep diving those principles and can see some of the really interesting complexity that lay within. Perhaps we'll have to get Colin or one of the rest of the team to come along in a few months and give us a rundown after the premiere to really deep dive those details. Anyway, as you can see, scaling agile is one of my favourite topics. I could go on and on and on, but the music's starting, and so I'll see you again next time. Thank you so much. See you again soon. Cheerio.
Next episode, in Whatever Happened to Nigel's Book.